Hey guys, I'm Jessie, and today we are going to be talking about my 2021 reading year in review. This is actually a book tag that I discovered and did not know was a tag. I was not tagged in it, but I thought it sounded fun and I wanted to do it. I will leave the original down below for you guys, of course, in case you want to do this to talk about your reading year in review. But yeah, let's get started with it. So before we jump into the tag, I'm going to give you some of my stats for the year, and I'm not good at tracking stats. I am not a stats person, but I did manage to read 68 books this year. I had a goal of 52, so I definitely overachieved. I set my goal at 52 pretty much every year because I know that it's a very achievable number for me. One book a week is definitely doable with my busy schedule. And I don't want to put too big of a number there because I will stress myself out about it. And I don't want to stress myself out about reading. It is just something I do for fun, something I really enjoy, and I want to continue to enjoy it. But I also like having a goal. I am the type of person that, like, if I don't have a deadline or a goal, I am very much a procrastinator. And I'll be like, oh, I'll read it at some point. No, I have to set goals for myself and deadlines and things like that. But I try to be nice to myself as well. So yeah, because if I didn't set anything, I'd be like, man, I'm just not going to do anything. Like, that's just the type of person I am. I'm very flighty and I have to have a goal and a deadline and a plan. And I still like to be lax with that though, right? Because we want to enjoy it, but we also need to make sure we're going through some things. All right, so first question is, what was your favorite book of the year? And that was really hard because I have a lot of books that I read that I absolutely love, but I'm gonna say that my favorite book of the year was The Bone Maker by Sarah Beth Durst. This is an adult fantasy standalone, and we are following this group of people who 25 years prior to the events of this novel saved the world from the big bad. And now they kind of have to get it back together, get the band back together, and possibly save the world again because the big bad might be coming back. And it's really, really a good book. I absolutely loved this one. And I think that more people should read it because Sarah Beth Durst is way too underhyped. She does not get enough love here on BookTube for all of her amazing stories. And this is actually the first book I read by her. I did a full review. You can check that out. I also did an interview with Sarah Beth Durst with my friend Sophia at Sophia's Thoughts. I will leave those videos down below. We split it in half and did half on her channel, half on mine. So I'll leave that down below so you can see how amazing this lady is. So I'm not going to be grabbing out all of the books for this because I don't feel like destroying my shelves again. But the next one is favorite series you've started this year but have not finished. And we're going to go with City of Brass, the Daevabad series. I read books 1 and 2. I still need to read book 3. And I absolutely loved it. It was so good. It is a Middle Eastern inspired fantasy book and I love it. We follow Nari, who is like an orphan and she's kind of like a street rat, kind of your like, give you some real Aladdin vibes. And she ends up accidentally summoning a djinn and has to be swept away to the city of Daevabad to kind of go and figure out who she is and her heritage. And then along the way, she meets this prince in Daevabad, and there's a lot of political upheaval, a lot of really cool magical creatures, and I absolutely loved it, and I cannot wait to finish the last book. The next is the favorite series you have finished this year, and that is going to be Queens of Rinthia, which is also by Sarah Beth Durst, and it is an adult fantasy trilogy, and there is one standalone spin-off in the same world but not following the same characters. I read all 4 of those books. Absolutely love them. If you want to know more about them, I have a video that I did talking about this series as a whole, non-spoilers, so you can go check that out if you're interested. And like I said, I interviewed her and she was like literally the nicest woman ever. So go check those out. But basically, this is following Delina in the first book. We follow her from a pretty young age as she ends up accidentally saving her family with these magical abilities to ward off the spirits of this world. And everything has spirits in this world. They're like nature spirits, and they are not nice and friendly. They are very violent and killy, stabby, and she ends up saving her family from an attack, and she ends up going to like this magical school, and it sounds pretty basic, right? But it is definitely not. As we continue on, it gets very much more like kind of diverting from your normal fantasy tropes and really subverts a lot of those tropes. There's a lot of like girl friendships instead of like the one chosen one. Like, we don't have a chosen one. Delina is not a chosen one. She's kind of the opposite of a chosen one. She's not very good. Like, she can do it, but she works really hard. But even though she works really hard, she's still not the best and not the chosen one. And there's like this core group of like girlfriends, and they end up like working together instead of competing with each other, and it's really fantastic. And then the second book introduces my favorite character, Naylene, and she is a middle-aged mom of two who don't want nothing to do with saving the world. She just wants to raise her kids in peace, but you know that can't happen. And I love this series. I love it so much, and I will not stop talking about it because I want more people to read it. Like, read it! Your favorite new author that you've discovered this year. This is just going to be a Sarah Beth Durst channel because my answer is Sarah Beth Durst. I read, like I said, The Bone Maker. We're not going to throw it at myself, are we? The Bone Maker was the first book that I read by her. I read an arc, and then I had to pick up had to get this cover. Like, I had to get the physical copy. And she is just such an amazing writer. She writes in primarily fantasy. Pretty much everything I think she's written is fantasy. But she writes across age ranges. Like, I have middle grade books by her that I have yet to read, but I've got for like my daughter and I. And my daughter has actually started reading one of them and loves it so far. I have read all of her adult fantasy this year. So, Bone Maker, Queens of Renthia, Race the Sands. Race the Sands is fantastic too. Another adult fantasy standalone. And she writes a lot of standalones too, which is awesome in the fantasy space because we don't get enough of them. Like, for some reason, like, everything has to be a series. And when you can do just some standalones in the fantasy space, like, props, because you have done a great job. And I love her books. She also has some YA books that I haven't read yet that I picked up recently. So I'm really excited just to see more of her books outside of the adult fantasy ones that I've read. And she's just, like I said earlier, that interview with her was just fantastic. She is so nice and kind, and I just adore her. So definitely Sarah Beth Durst is my favorite author that I've discovered this year. The next one is the favorite new character that you've discovered this year. And what do y'all think it is? What do you think I'm going to say? Naylene from Queens of Renthia. Like I said just a second ago, she is a middle-aged mom of two who don't want nothing to do with saving the world. She just wants to raise her children in peace and live her life. But we know that can't happen in a fantasy book, so she has to save the world while also being a mom of two obnoxious, adorable children. And I love that, for one, her children feel like children. I feel like in a lot of fantasy books, like 7 and 8-year-old children feel too much like adults, right? Like, they're not annoying enough. Like, I love my kids, but they're annoying. Let's be real. I love them, and I would die for them. But sometimes I also want them to just go to bed. So there's a balance there. And I love that Sarah Beth Durst, as a mother herself, is great at writing other mothers and children that feel like actual children. And Naylene is just one of those characters that I loved so much this year and can't stop talking about because she is fantastic. Like, she is amazingly badass, and you know, she's kind of like real stoic and hard, but she has this like really soft side to her, and I love her, and she's so complex as a character. And I know a lot of times we get moms in fantasy books when they're like not the main character and they're really boring or they're very one-dimensional, and that is definitely not the case here. So she's my favorite character of the year. All right, the next one is favorite new release of the year, and I could talk about The Bone Maker, but I already talked about that as my favorite. So we're gonna go a little different and kind of surprising, and go A Dragon Bird in the Fern by Laura Ruckert. This is also a adult fantasy standalone. It definitely leans more towards like new adult, young adult, but it is a fantasy standalone. And I got this as an ARC on NetGalley, just like randomly, and didn't really think much of it. Read it on my trip to North Carolina, read it on our way up there, fell in love with it. We're following this girl, and she is the second daughter of the royal family in her land, and her older sister is supposed to be marrying this man from another country, so it's like a political marriage, right? Well, the sister ends up murdered, and the younger sister, our main character, ends up having to kind of take her place, but like she doesn't speak the language of the husband that she's supposed to be marrying, the land that she's supposed to be going to. And it's like a really big deal because she struggles with reading in her own language, let alone learning another language. And as I'm reading this, I'm like, is she dyslexic? Right? Because it doesn't really say that. It does not explicitly say like this is a dyslexic female main character. But the more I'm reading, the more I'm like, this is a dyslexic main character. Like, all the traits are there, the way they process language. And I know this because my daughter was diagnosed with dyslexia in the end of 2020. And it's something that I've been working closely with her. We have somebody that comes into her school and helps her. And a lot of the struggles are, I'm like, this is what I noticed from my kid. Like, being able to learn audibly, but not by reading. Just like little things like that, mixing up letters, not understanding the differences in things. So we have a main character who is a female who is dyslexic. Dyslexia is very underdiagnosed, especially in females. So I love seeing that representation. And while we do have a political marriage in this, it does end up blossoming into this adorable, sweet, actual romance. But like the romance is definitely not the main plot in this. And I love that it's kind of like on the side, on the back burner. And then she's also trying to solve the murder of her sister while learning this new language, and then uncovering this like massive political scheme in the new place that she's in. But no one really believes her, or she can't really talk with people because no one else speaks her language except for one person who she may or may not be able to trust, and that is her translator. So we've got a lot, it feels like, going on in this book with the political machinations and then the murder mystery and a little bit of romance, but it all comes together so well, and I absolutely loved this. Not enough people are talking about this, and I really think that people should read this one. All right, the next question is your favorite reread of the year, and that is Mistborn. I ended up rereading the entire series with the Cosmere Crab-Along, and after reading it once, I realized I like it even more on a reread. And that, a lot of that is because I can easily pick up on the Easter eggs in it and the Cosmere connections and things that I didn't see the first time I read this. And rereading it, knowing what I know now, is so much fun. And especially because I'm also reading the Stormlight Archives, and I'm reading those for the first time. I'm almost done with Rhythm of War. Well, I say almost done. I'm like halfway done with Rhythm of War. But just seeing those little connections and then being able to see different connections from this series in the Stormlight Archives has made this reread such a blast. And then rereading it with all the people from the Cosmere Crab-Along and talking in the Discord, and that's just been a lot of fun in our live shows. So this is probably my favorite reread of the year. The next one is your biggest surprise of the year. And while I could go with The Dragon Bird and the Fern, like I just said, we're going to go with another one that I got as an ARC on NetGalley. And that is that is The Prison Healer by Lynette Nani. Again, this is one that I saw on NetGalley. I was like, oh, requested. It sounds like a good time, whatever. I read it and I flew through it and I absolutely loved it. Again, I have a full review if you want to check that one out. But this is about a girl who goes into this really tough death prison. It reminds me of something you would see in Russia when she's very, very young, and she goes in with her dad, and obviously her dad passes away, and she takes up the mantle of being the prison healer. So she is basically the medic. And when people like come into the prison, she has to like carve on their hand, like brand them, give them a medical checkup, and then they go on their merry way. Well, at some point, we get this rebel queen that ends up coming into the prison, but she is on her deathbed. And our main character gets this note from the outside world that says, keep her alive until we can come get you. And she basically has to take on these trials to try to save this rebel queen who was like comatose and just like on her deathbed. And it's so good. There's definitely an adorable romance in here, and there's a lot of twists and turns. That last page of this book had me like, what? Like, there were some twists that I was like, oh, okay, I guess that I saw it. But then there's some twists that I was like, I did not see that coming. And being someone that reads a lot of fantasy books, having a YA fantasy surprise me is kind of like really shocking. And I'm very excited to read book 2 in this series. And this is the actual Fairy Loot edition. So it is beautiful. And we've got like this really pretty under art cover. So yeah, that was a NetGalley arc that really surprised me this year. NetGalley's been pretty good to me this year. 3 of these books that have made it on my top list all started as NetGalley books. The next one is your biggest disappointment of the year. And I did DNF quite a few books this year. You can check out all the ones I DNF'd in my DNFs video. But I want to say the biggest disappointment was Dune. Sorry. It was a DNF about 100 and something pages in. I just couldn't get into it. I wasn't enjoying it. I couldn't get into it. I couldn't connect to any of the characters. I was bored. And I just couldn't. I didn't like it. So I DNF'd it and I got rid of it. And I really thought I would like it. And then I ended up watching the new movie with my husband and we both loved the movie. So I don't know why I loved the new movie, could not stand the book. The next one is a book from this year that you would recommend to everyone. Honestly, any of the books I've talked about, Dragonbird and the Fern, The Prison Healer, and The Bone Maker, I would definitely recommend to anybody because they are just so good. Anybody that reads fantasy. Like, if you don't read fantasy, like, for one, why are you here? Because it's all I really talk about. But also, like, you're not gonna love these if you don't love the fantasy genre. Maybe Dragonbird and the Fern. I think if you like murder mystery and, like, you're wanting to get into fantasy, this would be a good one because, like, the fantasy elements are pretty light in it. But it's, like, pretty heavy on the politics and the, like, murder mystery side of it. So that one I think would be good to cross genres for people that don't read a lot of fantasy, that want to read more fantasy, that are more, like, into, like, the murder mysteries. But any of these you need to pick up. I would recommend them to everybody. Like, there's some books where I'm like, I loved them, but I would not recommend them to everybody, and these are ones that I would. And then that was our last question. The last one says tag some friends, which whoever wants to do this, I'll tag some people in the description if you want to do this. I thought it was a lot of fun just talking about some of my favorites and most disappointing books, and having it set up like a tag just makes it very easy to go through because I'm like, okay, it's this one and this one and this one and this one. So it just makes it easy to go through. And I would love to see some of y'all's questions. What were your most disappointing and your most favorites and your most surprising books of the year? Let me know. All right, my name is Jessie. Thank you for hanging out with me, and I will see you next time. Bye.